God of War is here, and it's deeper and more systems heavy than you might expect. It's also really challenging. So if you're looking for a quick primer, we got you covered with 10 things you need to know before starting a new game. Starting off at number 10, this one might be obvious, but it'll smack you in the face. So let's talk about parrying. You're gonna need to be good at parrying if you want to excel in God of War's combat at all. I mean, sure, you can just kind of swinging and hacking at dudes, but if you want to actually have a good time and not always be at the brink of death the entire game, you're gonna need to master Kratos' parry with his shield. Blocking with the shield just as enemies are about to strike will parry instead of just the standard block, and that'll give you an opening to, of course, counter and attack. If you've heard this before, stop me, because it's pretty much every video game. But still, like every game, it takes some practice. You can also unlock abilities to have more effective parry moves, such as an immediate counter strike that smashes an enemy with your shield right after the block. There's also a more powerful shield slam with an area effect, or the ability to parry incoming projectiles to redirect it back at the enemy. Working these counters into your combat really helps the flow of combat, and it just makes it feel more fun, and it gives you more control, and you don't die as easily, which is just a huge plus. So get used to doing it early and make it a habit. This isn't the type of game where you can ignore parrying and still exceed, so get on it. Now at number 9, kind of changing gears, I can't stress this enough, but just don't rush through the story and stuff. There is so much side stuff to work through, like side missions, optional bosses, and other little things to explore. A lot of these things also have some additional story attached to it that you're gonna miss out on if you don't take the time to look for it. Unlike previous God of War games, this one actually really wants you to explore and take on this optional stuff for a variety of reasons. There are totally optional subplots that are out there in the world to discover that really actually helps flesh out the story and your understanding of the world of Midgar. They're not just filler. That's what I'm trying to emphasize here. You won't want to miss out on some of these. Plus, of course, taking on side missions also will help you level up, but I'll get more to that later. This does lead to my next point though at number 8, and that's skipping things and coming back later, because the hub structure is a bit confusing at first, and it takes a while for it to open up and really get you settled into the main flow of game. But once you're in it for a few hours, know that you can skip something in the environment and come back later. Not everything is a puzzle that you need to solve to progress. The main lake area itself has a bunch of diversions and inaccessible doors and areas and stuff. You won't realize it at first, but the game has some Metroidvania style elements, meaning you'll gain a useful new tool or ability to help you go back and tackle something you couldn't previously. You're gonna wanna take mental notes of places to revisit simply because you're gonna want those rewards later on. You're gonna want a stronger Kratos, because like I said earlier, you're gonna be getting your ass kicked. The same goes for enemies too. If you're pursuing a side objective and a higher level enemy is pummeling you and holding you back, that's a perfect reason why you're gonna wanna get stronger and come back later and kick his ass. Now at number 7, this is kind of like a housekeeping point, but this is a simple one I just wanna make after playing, because everyone always asks me. No, you don't have to have played the previous games in the series to hop right into this one. It is very much a new journey, many years later, and while there are many callbacks and certain ramifications and influences and stuff, the events of the previous God of War games are almost treated like far-off myths or legends. Just know that Kratos was once an angry, younger man who suffered loss and didn't control his rage and basically destroyed all of Olympus. But he's also just not some human. He's got a little bit more to him. I'll leave it at that. Because at number 6, let's talk about the Bestiary. This is actually something very useful. You know how Monster Hunter World had the monster field guide that tells you about each monster's weaknesses and it's just a good tool when it comes to actually fighting them? Well, God of War has a similar thing called the Bestiary, and it's in the Codex, and this is where Atreus will actually keep track of each enemy type you run into and also write down their weaknesses and just the general strategy. Just like with Monster Hunter, the more you fight these enemies though, the more points you will learn about them, which just leads to making them much easier to defeat. Now, it's easily accessible because every time you learn something new, you get that D-pad prompt to open it up and quickly read it. Don't ignore that, because sometimes it'll point out something that you're not immediately picking up on. Some things aren't always as apparent, so it's good to do your homework first. Now at number 5, this next tip, I've seen this one going around a lot on Twitter and Reddit and stuff. Don't buy gear early on, or for a lot of the game, don't spend your hack silver on stuff. Avoid trying to buy gear and armor straight up, because if you explore the world a good amount, you're gonna start coming across more than enough gear just by exploring and doing side stuff. What you really wanna do is save that hack silver for actually upgrading your weapons and pieces of gear. The upgrading is more important than the actual crafting or buying of most of the gear. Upgrading your stuff is always gonna do a way better job than just buying something new. Especially at the rate you find stuff, like I said, throughout the game, don't get too attached to some of the stuff you find, because you'll just be selling it for hack silver just as quickly as you find it. But moving on to number 4, here's a quickie point. It took me an hour or so to pick up on this, and I'll save you some time. Keep an eye out for collectibles of all different types, just because they're not just busy work. Even if you're not the collector type in these type of games, you can sell these collectibles collectibles to merchants for hack silver, and you're gonna need that currency every chance you get. So keep your eyes peeled on the ground and in the air for things to smash or pick up or throw your hammer at, because you're not just checking off a box, you're also earning some cash. Getting a little more technical, coming down to number 3, always look into and reconsider your enchantments when you move on to a new realm, because as you progress, every realm in the game introduces you to different enemy types and ways of fighting, as well as different elemental effects that enemies can either inflict on you or you are weak to. Enchantments are one of the many RPG-style customization buffs that the game has. It has a lot, and while it might kind of suck to be dipping into menus that often, you're gonna want to prioritize enchantments for very specific situations. If you're fighting a lot of fire-type enemies, take a good look and see if maybe you've picked up an enchantment that gives you attack bonuses for that enemy type. Or, I remember if you're in the dark realm, you'll find one that actually reduces dark elf damage and mitigates it by like 12%, and that's super key for that area, because they're tough. Because if you ignore stuff like that, you'll be at a huge disadvantage, so pay attention to the enchantments. Now, speaking of things to pay attention to, at number 2, don't ignore Atreus. He isn't totally useless as a kid, you would think in a video game. He's actually a great tool to utilize. He's actually very useful in combat. His basic attack is with a bow and arrow. Tap square, it'll prompt him to shoot whoever is directly in front of you, which is sometimes super useful when trying to break an enemy's attack animation or just kind of temporarily distract them. After upgrading, he also gets access to some magic arrows, and he can also stun enemies by jumping on them and choking them, which will actually damage them as well. It's super important to upgrade Atreus just as much as you upgrade Kratos, because he can be really useful once you get further into the upgrade tree. When you're sitting on XP and don't know what exactly to spend it on, especially in the early hours, I'd say just dump it right into some arrow skills. I'd actually even go as far as to say consider prioritizing the teamwork, acrobatics combos, and Atreus Power 1 upgrades. Now at number 1, let's talk about the attacks I think are awesome, the runic attacks. They're great, but they're another thing you're gonna need to dip into menus and swap in and out of every so often. There's a light and heavy runic attack that you can have both equipped at all times, and it's worth exploring to find more of these because they are so useful. But I wanna say in the upgrades and equipment screens, be sure to keep an eye on the 3 stat types that each rune attack has. You're gonna need to experiment with these. I found like a spinning AoE attack that I love to use early on, but it just wasn't cutting it against certain enemy types later on who were better at blocking. They're all worth giving a shot because they're all unique in at least some way, whether it's stats or actual movement, and I promise you, most of them are not a waste of time. But those are 10 quick things we think you need to know before starting a new game in God of War. It's a very satisfying game so far, and it's surprisingly deep, so we wanted to make sure you were covered if you like to go in a little prepared. If you have been playing though, since it is out today, I want to know what you guys are thinking, anything you've picked up on, any tips, share it for us down in the comments. We want to hear from you guys. But if you did enjoy this video and learned a thing or two, clicking the like button does help us out. We really appreciate it, and if you're new, you should subscribe because we put out stuff like this every single day. But as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.